joyful being in the universe. Maybe you just have to think a little bit anecdotally right now to start wrapping your mind around this. I want you right now to think about the thing in life that brings you joy. Whatever it is, what is it that brings you the most joy? And I want you to realize that whatever it is you're thinking of right now, God created it. He created it. He is the one who thought all of that up. I'll give you an example. This last week had a great week. Hopefully most of you did as well. We had a Thanksgiving meal here at church. I think the final count is we served like 90 people a meal. We had just a nice time of fellowship together. By the way, thanks to those of you who helped put that on. Rob, thank you for what you did. Mike Shapansky was very instrumental. There were a lot of people who got involved. Thank you. It was a great time. In addition to that, I don't know if you know this or not, but our church put together 32 baskets and gave them away to people who were in need. It was a great Thanksgiving celebration. That day was my parents' 40th wedding anniversary on Thanksgiving Day. So we had a meal together. It was a great time. It was just a great day. The next day, how many of you got up early? Just come on, admit it. I did too, actually, but not to shop. Actually, I was a consumer, though. You know what? My daughters and I started this tradition last year. We got up early, and Sam's Club has a free breakfast. And I took them there. I don't know why they're so excited about this, but they are. I took them there to eat that free breakfast. And after we ate and watched everyone buying their TVs, I took them to the beach, and we stayed there on the beach and watched the sunrise together. Just a great time. And the kids were having a good time. There was that is great. And I realized God's the one who makes that sunrise the kind of beautiful way that it rises in the sky. The things that we take the most joy in this life, God created them. A couple of Bible verses I'll draw your attention to. The first one comes from the Gospel of John. These are Jesus' words to his disciples. He says, "As the Father has loved me, so I have loved you. Now remain in my love." Then he says, "If you obey my commands, you will remain in my love, just as I have obeyed the Father's commands and remain in his love." Now I want you to just key into this last line. "I have told you this so that my joy may be in you and that your joy may be complete." I hope you caught and understood what Jesus was saying. He's saying, I have this joy that's this deep, abounding, huge joy. And I want that joy to be in you, and I want your joy to be complete. So you just have to get this concept of God. One of the things you need to know about him, he is the most joyful being in the universe. I think the disciples, they understood this. As they went and preached, they said things like this. This comes from the book of Philippians. It's the words of the Apostle Paul. "Rejoice in the Lord always." I'll say it again, rejoice. Not only is God the most joyful being in the universe, he wants to draw us into his joy. So he says here, this is how I want you to be. Rejoice. Be full of joy. Take delight. Enjoy. Rejoice. Do you see that? God, the center of this universe, the most joyful being, desires us to be filled with joy. Now, I want to think about this in another way. Here's what I'd like for you to do. If you would you turn in your Bibles with me to Leviticus chapter 23. How many of you have read the book of Leviticus before? If you've ever tried, maybe the first thing that went through your mind was not, wow, what a book full of joy. But I want to show you that, in fact, that's exactly what this book is. It's this book that's just filled with the idea of being joyful. Chapter 23 contains a table of 7 feasts that God's people were supposed to celebrate every single year. And I want to just kind of look over those with you and help you to understand that when God saved his people from Israel, one of the first things he wanted to teach them was that he wanted to be filled with joy and just have joy in their hearts and rejoice before God all the time. I'll begin reading in verse 1. "The Lord said to Moses, Speak to the Israelites and say to them, These are my appointed feasts, the appointed feasts of the Lord, which you are to proclaim as sacred assemblies. The first one is the Sabbath. That's a weekly celebration that the Israelites were supposed to carry out. There are 6 days when you may work, but the seventh day is a Sabbath of rest, a day of sacred assembly. You are not to do any work wherever you live. It is a Sabbath to the Lord. I want you to key in on this phrase. It's in the middle of verse 3. You are not to do any work. I think it's helpful now to understand a little bit about the history that goes behind this. We've been talking about the Exodus. If you've been here the last few weeks, the Israelites were enslaved in Egypt. They were forced into labor. 7 days a week, they did one thing: work. Pharaoh had them building bricks so that he could build up storehouses for himself, and they made brick after brick after brick after brick, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. And if you were forced into labor and you were a slave, how were you valued? Where would you get your value from? How did Pharaoh value you? By the number of bricks you were able to make, right? I mean, a good slave produces more bricks than a bad slave, right? So that's how the Israelites in forced labor, in slavery, were valued, by how much work they are able to do. Then God, he hears their cries, he sees their turmoil, he answers them, he says, I'm going to bring you out of that land. And at some point, we've talked all about this now, God brings them out of the land, and he says, okay, I'm not like Pharaoh. And if you're going to be my people, I'm not going to treat you like Pharaoh treated you. God says, you are not valuable to me according to what you're able to produce or do. That might be shocking for some of us who more or less see our value tied into what we're able to produce. But to God, it's not what we do that makes us valuable to him. So God says here, this is what I want you to do. 1 day out of every 7, don't work. Just don't work. Stop. Celebrate. Rejoice. Don't work. I want you to look at the rest of these feasts and festivals. The next one is the Passover and the Feast of Unleavened Bread. I want you to look with me at verse 7 so you can see this key phrase again. On the first day, hold a sacred assembly and do no regular work. The next one is called the Feast of First Fruits. Then we have the Feast of Weeks, just so you can see how this theme kind of carries forward. I want you to look with me at verse 21. It says, on that same day, you are to proclaim a sacred assembly and do no regular work. This is to be a lasting ordinance for the generations to come wherever you live. The next feast is called the Feast of Trumpets. I want you to look with me at verse 25. It says, do no regular work. The next feast is called the Day of Atonement. And I really want to key you into this one. If you look with me at verse 29. Or we'll start at verse 28. Do no work on that day, because it's the Day of Atonement, when atonement is made for you before the Lord your God. Verse 29. Anyone who does not deny himself, in other words, on that day you think, okay, well, I know I'm not supposed to work, but I really have a lot to do, so I'm going to just keep on working. God says anyone who doesn't deny himself in that way must be cut off from his people. Then God says, I will destroy from among his people anyone who does any work on that day. Now you sit back and you think, well, what would it be that would get God so mad that he'd say, I'm going to destroy you? And it's if you work when God says don't work. I want you to celebrate. I want you to be refreshed. I want you to rest. I want you to enjoy. And if you can't be the kind of person who takes joy in God, then you can't be part of my people. Look at this next feast. It's called the Feast of Tabernacles. Verse 33, the Lord said to Moses, say to the Israelites, on the 15th day of the 7th month, the Lord's Feast of Tabernacles begins, and it lasts for 7 days. The first day is a sacred assembly. Do no regular work. Are you picking up a theme? You see that? I want you to look down with me at verse 39. Beginning the 15th day of the 7th month, after you gather the crops of the land, celebrate the festival to the Lord for 7 days. The first day is a day of rest, and the 8th day also a day of rest. On the first day, you're to take choice fruit from the trees and palm fronds, leafy branches and poplars, and rejoice before the Lord your God for 7 days. Celebrate this as a festival to the Lord for 7 days each year. This is to be a lasting ordinance for the generations to come. Celebrate it in the 7th month. Now, historians tell us what these feasts and festivals were like when the Israelites went up to Jerusalem. There was this party atmosphere. It was live. These next couple of verses talk about how at that time God had commanded his people to live in booths, to basically live in tents. I don't know what kind of atmosphere comes to your mind. I'm thinking of like the St. Lucie County Fair. It was live. There were people there. There was music. There was dancing. There was singing. People came into the presence of God. At the end of the harvest time, they would take their choice fruit and their leafy branches. They'd wave them before God. There would be music. People would say, "Give thanks to the Lord, for he is good." And everyone shout together, "His love endures forever." Yeah! And that's what God wanted. He wanted people to say, "Stop working. It's time to party here." There were songs that pilgrims sang as they went up to Jerusalem to celebrate these feasts. They're called the Psalms of Ascent. You can find them in the Bible. They start at Psalm 121, Psalms of Ascent. One of those psalms, Psalm 122, begins this way: "I rejoiced when they said to me, 'Let us go to the house of the Lord.'" It's just, all right, we get no more work. Let's go party in God's presence and celebrate all that he's given to us. And I want you to see that's what God wanted from his people, to be filled with joy, to take delight in him, to celebrate, to party, to rest. I'm going to try and let's go a little bit further here. I want you to just turn in with me in your Bibles, 2 passages. Hebrew lesson for the day. First one, Exodus chapter 23.